Hi, today we're going to talk about a concept, counter-fuzzing. As fuzzing has become one of the most powerful tools for vulnerability discovery, attackers have started using it to find zero-day bugs in programs they didn't write, especially in closed-source binaries. That's where counter-fuzzing comes in. Instead of letting fuzzers freely explore a program, counter-fuzzing introduces techniques that slow them down, mislead them, and even stop them completely. In this presentation, we'll walk you through what counter-fuzzing is, what it matters, and the experiment idea we used. As many of you may know, fuzzing is a widely used approach for discovering software bugs. It works by injecting a large number of random or carefully structured input into a program and monitoring how the program responds, looking for crash, hangs, and unexpected behaviors. Over the past decade, fuzzing has become a powerful tool not only for developers and security researchers, but also for automated vulnerability discovery systems. However, like many tools in cybersecurity, fuzzing is a double-edged sword. While it's great for improving software robustness, attackers can also use fuzzers, especially advanced ones like AFL, handfuzz, or Q system, to find previous unknown zero-day vulnerability in release binaries, particularly when the source code isn't available. This has created a new category of risks where even publicly distributed software become a target for black box fuzzing attacks. This brings us to counter-fuzzing, a set of techniques and strategies that aim to define software from being effectually fuzzed. But it's important to note, counter-fuzzing does not eliminate vulnerabilities. Instead, it tries to make them harder to discover, to delay or mislead fuzzer tools, buying vulnerable time for developers or trust third parties to identify and fix vulnerability before malicious actors can exploit them. So, how does counter-fuzzing work in practice? There are a few core strategies used in counter-fuzzing, and they each target a different component of the fuzzing pipelines. We have what's known as anti-fuzz execution techniques. These techniques deliberately slow down the execution of a program only when it's being fuzzed, usually by inserting artificial delay into paths that are frequently reached during fuzzing but rarely in real-world use. A great example of this is speed bump, a counter-fuzzing method that injects CPU-intensive code into code path, branch of the program that normal user really trigger but the fuzzer hit all the time. This creates a disproportionate performance penalty for fuzzers, making fuzzing hundreds or thousands of times slower, while normal users experience little or no noticeable impact. We have anti-feedback techniques such as branch trap. Most modern fuzzers rely heavily on coverage feedback, that is, checking which part of the code were executed, so they can focus on generating input that reach new code paths. Anti-feedback techniques exert fake conditional branches or dummy control flow placed into the program. These branches are sensitive to minor input changes, which trick the fuzzer into thinking it's exploiting new logic. In reality, it's just burning time and computation on non-bugging, misleading paths, which are carefully designed to waste its resources. Even worse for the fuzzer, techniques like branch trap can saturate the fuzzer's internal coverage maps, effectively blinding it to meaningful change in execution. The hybrid techniques. These specifically target hybrid fuzzers that use symbolic execution or intent analysis, powerful methods for solving complex logic conditions and checking which input byte affect which part of the program. Anti-hybrid works by transforming explicit data flow into implicit ones, making it much harder for intent tracking to determine the true influence of input. It also introduces hash-like computations or mathematical explanation to explore the number of symbolic paths, leading to what's called path explanation, a state where symbolic engines like queue system simply time out or give up. There are fuzzing detection mechanisms. These monitor the execution environment and detect telltale signs of fuzzing. For instance, unusually high execution frequency or the presence of instrumentation artifact introduced by binary-only fuzzer, like FLQEMU. When such conditions are detected, the program may respond by slightly failing, introducing random delay, or even crashing intentionally to fool the fuzzer. Importantly, all of these techniques are carefully designed to minimize any noticeable effect on normal user. That's one of the defining challenge of counterfacing: balance security with usability. Now let's look at a practical and efficient implementation of this idea: no fuss. While many counterfacing techniques tend to introduce high overhead or require manual intervention, no fuss was designed to be lightweight, automated, and specifically effective against binary-only fuzzers such as FLQEMU. It combines both passive detection and active distribution techniques to resist fuzzing attempts without impacting regular users. Let's dive into how it works, which are designed to directly interfere with the mechanism fuzzer rely on, especially those that work without source code access. There are two main categories of active techniques: fake blanks and anti-hybrid defenses. The active techniques primarily involve two components: fake blocks and anti-hybrid techniques. The goal here is to impede binary-only fuzzing. Now, how does NoFuzz achieve this? NoFuzz introduces fake blocks, which are essentially code blocks strategically inserted into the program. These blocks are designed to confuse fuzzer and disrupt the coverage analysis. A crucial aspect is optimization. The fake blocks are optimized to significantly reduce storage overhead. This is represented by optimized blocks flow leading to landing space and reduced storage overhead in the diagram. NoFuzz also employs anti-hybrid techniques. There are specific methods developed to counter hybrid fuzzing approaches, which combine fuzzing with other analysis techniques like symbolic execution. To improve efficiency, NoFuzz replaces heavyweight cryptographic function with lightweight operations, using simpler algorithm calculation instead. This is shown as lightweight function component. Finally, NoFuzz introduces input and contents. There are contents whose value depends on the program's input, making it more challenging for symbolic execution engines to determine their value, and thus hinders symbolic execution as depicted in the diagram. In essence, NoFuzz strategically combines these active techniques to efficiently counter fuzzing attempts while minimizing performance and storage penalties. Let's shift our focus on NoFuzz passive detection methods. The primary goal here is to accurately detect the presence of fuzzers, while crucially minimizing any negative impact on regular users of the protected software. NoFuzz employs two main passive detection techniques: detect binary-only instrumentation and examine execution frequency. Now let's take a closer look at the passive detection method used in NoFuzz. These techniques aim to identify whether a program is being fuzzed without interrupting normal user. As shown in this slide, there are two key detection strategies. The first approach targets binary-only fuzzer like FLQEMU. This fuzzer inserts extra code to collect coverage data, and that introduces execution latency. NoFuzz detects this by comparing the timing gap between active and instrumented execution. Once a suspicious delay is observed, it introduces a 1 second latency to disrupt fuzzing speed. The second method relies on a fact that fuzzing involves high-frequency executions. No-fuzz monitors the rate of temporary file creation. If over 16 files are created within a minute, the program assumes it's under attack. In this case, no-fuzz may abort the execution or trigger a fake bug, misleading the fuzzer into thinking a real crash has occurred.
Here we are going to explain what is coverage-guided fuzzing. So fuzzing has proven to be one of the most successful approaches for discovering software bugs and security vulnerabilities. A typical fuzzing workflow includes three main components: test case generation, code coverage tracing, and crash triage. Among these, coverage tracing plays a central role. It helps the fuzzer decide which inputs are useful to keep generating more effective test cases. However, there's a major inefficiency in how coverage-guided fuzzers currently work. They trace every single test case, but in reality, less than 1 in 10,000 of those inputs actually reach new parts of the code and contribute to increased coverage. Despite this, over 90% of the time spent fuzzing is wasted, just executing and tracing inputs that don't help. This paper addresses that problem by introducing a new idea called coverage-guided tracing, and a system called onTracer, designed specifically to reduce the overhead caused by tracing unnecessary test cases. So how onTracer works? Before diving into onTracer, let us briefly introduce three key components used in its architecture. Interest oracle. Interest oracle is inserted at every uncovered basic block to mark newly discovered code blocks. Thus, if a test case triggers the interrupt, it has exercised some new basic block and is marked as coverage increasing. In onTracer, they use dynamic static control flow analysis and must ensure to prevent interrupts from trigger before fork server initialization. SIG trap is a signal used to trigger the interest oracle, and its machine code is 0xCC. Since 0xCC is only 1 byte, it avoids overwriting too much of the original code in small basic blocks, preserving execution. The second is trace binary. They utilize dynamics to statically instrument the tracer with a fork server for fast execution and coverage callbacks inserted in each of its basic block for coverage tracing. When an input first reaches a previously uncovered basic block, it triggers the 0xCC instruction inserted at the start of that block in the oracle binary, resulting in a SIG trap signal. This indicates the input is a coverage increasing test case because it reaches a new block. The coverage increasing input is then sent to the tracer binary for execution. Each basic block in the tracer binary has a callback function inserted by dynamics. So during execution, it records all the blocks covered by that input and updates the coverage information. Then finally is a fork server instrumentation. By launching new process via fork function, the fork server avoids repetitive process initialization. So now let's talk about how onTracer works. First, AEFL runs some basic setup routines like creating working directories and file descriptors. Once that's done, onTracer steps in and increments two versions of target binary, the oracle binary and the tracer binary. The oracle binary is equipped with a fork server for fast execution. The tracer binary also gets a fork server, but with additional instrumentation at the basic block level. These stats track which parts of the code get executed. Since the oracle uses software interrupts to detect when a test case hits new code, onTracer first uses static analysis, like shown in the line 5, to find all basic blocks in the program. Then it inserted a special interrupt, a 0xCC byte, at the start of each block in the oracle binary. This interrupt will later help identify coverage increasing test cases. After that, both binaries are initialized by starting their repetitive fork servers. Now, we enter AFL's main fuzzing loop. It generates test cases one by one, and each test case is first executed on the Oracle binary. If it triggers one of the interrupts, we know it's exercising a new basic block, so it's marked as coverage increasing, like shown in the line 14. At this point, onTracer runs the same test case on the tracer binary to collect full coverage information to log every block that the input touched in the line 15. To update the Oracle binary for future test cases, we stop its fork server, and onTracer removes the 0xCC interrupts from any newly covered blocks. In this way, only new blocks in the future will trigger interrupts, keeping the detection accurate. Once that's done, the updated Oracle fork server is restarted. Finally, AFL finishes handling that input, like adding it to the queue or using it to generate new mutations, and moves on to the next one.
So why we picked CJSON as our experiment target? With a tiny parser like CJSON, it's just about 1.5 thousand blocks. You can run tens of thousands of tests per second. But if you sneak in a 10 million iteration busy loop in a hotspot, that drops way down to only a few thousand per second. And on the other hand, like PDF to HTML or TCP dump already top out at a few thousand runs a second. So adding the same delay hardly changes their speed. And CJSON's parse logic always begins in parse value function. No matter how large or small the input, every invocation immediately hits our injected delay. So the slowdown effect of counterfuzzing instrumentation is maximally uniform and easy to measure. Programs with longer, data-dependent hot paths might skip over delay code unpredictably, weakening the observable impact. So, in short, CJSON's small size and single entry parse function ensure both high baseline speed and guarantee loop hits on every test case. Ideal conditions for demonstrating and quantifying counterfuzzing overhead. So the right part is our setting commands. We can see the last line. This command is to launch the fuzzer, and there's some parameters we need to explain. First, the -IC direction points at our initial JSON samples, and the -out directory is where AFL will write its test case and crashes, and the -x JSON dictionary gives domain-specific mutations, and the -t 2000 plus raises our per test timeout to 2 seconds in order to avoid killing slow spins. And finally, the double @ tells AFL where to plug in each generated test file on the command line. The next part is Introduction to CJSON.c. CJSON.c is the core file of the CJSON library, responsible for parsing and generating JSON data in C. The key functions we focused on: parse value and CJSON parse with ops. Parse value handles different JSON value types like strings, numbers, objects, and arrays. And CJSON parse with ops is the main entry point that uses parse value for parsing the entire JSON string. So why we chose parse value for counterfuzzing? We selected parse value because it processes all JSON values during parsing. It's a hotspot in the parsing logic, making it a perfect place to introduce delays and disrupt fuzzing tools. The techniques we used are added here to slow down the parsing process predictably. So let's see what we have done. I'll introduce 3 counterfuzzing techniques that we used in our experiment to slow down coverage-guided fuzzers and make their analysis less efficient. These techniques are busy loop, input-dependent delay, and dynamic self-modification. The busy loop method involves adding a constant, time-consuming loop at critical points in the code. We inserted a busy loop function inside parse value. This is because parse value is invoked for every JSON value, making it the perfect spot for our delay. By adding a busy loop, we slow down the parsing process for every input that requires parsing, effectively forcing the fuzzer to take more time to process the inputs. The key point is that the delay is inserted without being detected by the fuzzer because of the no instrument directive, which prevents coverage-guided fuzzers from analyzing the loop itself. The IDD technique introduces the delay based on the hash of the input data. We use a portion of the input data, hash it, and if the hash meets a specific condition, such as matching a bit pattern, we trigger a time-consuming function like BusyLoop. The delay is conditional on the input data, making it unpredictable for the fuzzer. Only certain inputs will trigger the delay, so the fuzzer might spend unnecessary time analyzing those inputs. We use the no instrument directive to hide this delay from the fuzzer's coverage map, making the counter-fuzzing more effective. The last one is dynamic self-modification. DSM involves modifying the binary code at runtime to insert delays or other countermeasures dynamically. We modify the function pointer to jump to a slow, time-consuming function like slow stub. This slow function introduces a delay in the code's execution. DSM is stealthier because it changes the program's flow at runtime, making it more difficult for the fuzzer to track and analyze. This dynamic patching ensures that the fuzzing process is delayed without immediately triggering new code paths in the fuzzer's map, adding an extra layer of evasion. In this demo, I'm going to walk through 3 different fuzzing runs on the CJSON parser. First, we'll see how AFL works with the original CJSON.c file. Then we'll add a busy loop to the mix. And finally, we'll apply a technique called dynamic self-modification. I'll explain how each of these functions impacts fuzzing and why they help us slow down AFL's ability to explore the program. In the first video, we're running AFL with the original CJSON.c. Here, we're just seeing the baseline behavior of AFL with no modifications. AFL is trying to find as many code paths as it can, and it does this by feeding inputs into the CJSON parser. The most important functions in this case are parse value and CJSON parse with ops. AFL uses these to explore how the code behaves. The unmodified CJSON runs really fast. This is important because it gives us a baseline to see what happens when we start adding counter-fuzzing techniques. In the second video, we've added a busy loop at the entry point of the parse value function. Here's what happens. The busy loop doesn't really do anything useful, but it slows down the program by wasting CPU cycles. It doesn't change what AFL's testing, but it does make AFL run much slower. This slows down AFL's ability to explore the code quickly. If you watch the video, you'll see that the number of executions per second drops significantly after adding the busy loop. This shows how even a small delay can mess with AFL's ability to fuzz efficiently. The busy loop is a simple way to slow things down without changing the actual code paths AFL is exploring. It's a classic counter-fuzzing technique that slows AFL down but keeps it working on the same parts of the code. In the third video, we've applied DSM. This method involves modifying the program's code while it's running. Here's how it works. DSM modifies the program's own code during execution. This means that while AFL is fuzzing, parts of the program are changing, making it harder for AFL to predict how the program will behave. With DSM, AFL might not know what to expect because the program is dynamically changing. This throws a wrench into AFL's ability to explore paths in a predictable way, adding complexity and unpredictability to the fuzzing process. The main idea behind DSM is to make the program more unpredictable, which makes it harder for AFL to explore the code effectively. It's like adding a level of randomness that messes with AFL's strategy. So, to wrap it up, we started with the original CJSON.c to see how AFL behaves under normal conditions. Then we added two counter-fuzzing methods, the busy loop, which slows things down without changing what AFL is testing, and dynamic self-modification, which makes the program behave unpredictably by changing the code at runtime. By comparing the performance and coverage across these methods, we can see how each one affects AFL's ability to fuzz the program. Thanks for watching.
So here's the results of the experiments. Let's begin by comparing code coverage across the four strategies. In AFL++, this is measured by as edges, which refers to the number of unique control flow transitions that fuzzer discovers. Both the baseline and IDD versions quickly reach high coverage, stabilizing around 17. In contrast, the BL version increases very slowly and stalls at around 13, because the constant delay prevents many test cases from being executed. The DSM version shows almost no increase in coverage. The fuzzer is blocked from entering the core of the program. So just by looking at this graph, we can already classify the results into three groups. Baseline and IDD represent fast and deep fuzzing, BL results in slowed down fuzzing, and DSM completely blocks fuzzing. Next, let's look at fuzzing speed, specifically how many executions occur per second. So baseline starts very fast with over 4,000 executions per sec initially, then destabilizes around 650. IDD introduces selective delay depending on input, so its speed fluctuates but stays fairly high on average. BL remains below 10 executions per sec for the entire round, clearly showing that the fuzzer is being slowed significantly. DSM executes only a few inputs and then essentially stops. Execution speed is a critical indicator of how many different inputs the fuzzer can test. This result shows that while both IDD and BL slow things down, only DSM effectively brings fuzzer to a halt. Now, let's take a closer look at the internal behavior of the baseline case. So the graph here are from the AFL++ fuzzer stats.html file, the visualization, and they help us see what happened behind the coverage and speed metrics. The left top panel shows the number of unique edges discovered. It rises quickly and then flattens near 150, indicating efficient early exploration. And the right top panel shows the corpus and pending inputs. The gray area is the total number of the inputs saved, and the blue and purple lines represents pending and favored inputs. Here, the fuzzer is actively collecting, mutating, and testing new inputs to expand coverage. In the third panel, we can see no crashes or hangs. Mutation levels continues to increase, meaning the fuzzer is going deeper into test case variations. The final panel shows executions per sec, which remain stable throughout the fuzzing process. In summary, this baseline run demonstrates healthy fuzzing dynamics, high exploration, consistent throughput, and steady test case generation. Now, let's look at the other counter-fuzzing strategies. So BL inserts a fixed busy loop into the parsing logic. In the graph, edge growth is slow, corpus barely increases, and execution per sec drops drastically. Fuzzing isn't completely blocked, but it becomes extremely inefficient. IDD applies delay conditionally using a hash of the input. The coverage is comparable to or even slightly better than a baseline, and the corpus continues to grow. However, throughput is unstable and noisy. The fuzzer still works, but less efficiently. So DSM patches the program just before the entering the parser, redirecting a control flow to a dummy function. We excluded the graph for DSM due to AFL++ version differences, but the results were clear. Coverage barely increased, and execution almost stopped entirely. This method effectively shut down fuzzing. So this table summarizes the results of all 4 strategies. Baseline achieved the best results overall: fast execution, high coverage, and smooth exploration, which means the fuzzing worked properly. BL reduced throughout significantly, making the fuzzer less effective, and fuzzing still occurred. IDD preserved the high coverage while adding instability, making it good strategy for delaying attackers. DSM almost completely prevented fuzzing. It's the strongest defense, but also the most complex, with potential risks for stability or instrumentation. In short, the disruption level increases from BL to IDD to DSM, and so do the complexity and potential risks. Finally, let's review the trade-offs between the 3 counterfuzzing strategies. So the BL is the simplest. It just adds fixed delays. While it does slow the fuzzer, it is easy to detect and not very effective overall. In our experiment, execution speed dropped sharply, but fuzzing still continued. IDD introduces the delay selectively, making it a stealthier and more practical defense. Most inputs are processed normally, so attackers won't easily notice the slowdown. Coverage remains high, but the fuzzer becomes unstable, making it harder to get consistent results while still allowing exploration. DSM is by far the most powerful strategy. By redirecting execution before parsing even begins, it prevents the fuzzer from meaningfully exploring anything. In our tests, it produced almost no coverage or executions. However, it's also the most complex to implement and could interfere with instrumentation or debugging. So, what should we choose? If you want to completely block fuzzing, DSM is the strongest option. If you prefer a stealthy and adaptive defense, IDD strikes the best balance. And if you just need something quick and simple, BL still reduces fuzzing efficiency, though it's not sufficient on its own. Ultimately, counterfuzzing isn't just about blocking the fuzzer, it's about forcing attackers to waste time and resources. Choosing the right strategy depends on your threat model, performances, needs, and system stability requirements. That was all for our presentation. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us to discuss further more about this topic. Thank you.